Good morning, Jobman champions, and welcome to another Lunch and Learn webinar series. Today is a really important webinar. It's understanding catalog and inventory. It's one of the first major, step points for setting up your software, making sure that you've got a good understanding of how to get your catalog in, what that entails, and then linking that up to your inventory so you can start taking care of or utilizing, I should say, some of the Jobman smarts around managing your raw materials in your manufacturing process. It's also one of the most common reasons people come looking for an ERP outside of workflow management is an inventory system. So Jobman has you covered there, and we're going to be diving into that today. So today, what we really want to cover is the agenda around catalog and inventory management. So explaining the catalog, materials versus services, and products is also part of our catalog management, creating the importing materials, running through the inventory and explaining some of the important links behind that, and of course, how to add stock items to inventory to be able to follow those through. So our hope for today is that by the end of this webinar, you'll have a good understanding of both catalog and inventory, understanding the differences between each of the areas in Jobman and why they're separated, how to create import, and of course, how to add stock to your inventory. So what is the catalog? I guess foundationally, it is the area in which you can control all the things that you will purchase order potentially from your suppliers. This can include availability chart items, services, internal options for things like products for quoting, and all the raw material resources that you both buy and potentially quote, but most importantly that you buy. So the catalog is really the area by which we're entering our supplier information. So we need a way for the system to be able to manage that, and most importantly, a way for us with which to track that. And one of the other benefits of having your catalog digitized is, as you will see, when pricing changes, it's very easy in Jobman to then update that pricing. And that's one of the first stock control points that most people come to us about, is how can I then project manage pricing changes to ensure that I'm still my quoting is up to date, my purchase ordering is up to date. So Jobman offers a lot of accountability around that. And of course, a digital area to put it all in one place that then links to everything else you're doing with the software. So today, we're not going to focus too much on the products. As I mentioned, they will be covered in a later webinar because it is quite a large area of the software that is really powerful and really useful. So we'll be focusing on materials and services. And as a quick definition, materials would be your physical goods for purchase, and your services are anything that you purchase order outside of your normal scope of operation, but you project manage as part of your jobs. Very simple example, or easy example, I guess, would be if you manufacture kitchens. However, as part of project manage the install of the kitchen, you also project manage the install of appliances or power points or plumbing. So a service could be an electrician or a plumber that you use consistently on jobs that you want to be able to add quickly and easily into quotes to make sure that allowance is there, but then also be able to purchase order that from, or that service, I should say, directly without any mistakes coming through from your software. The other benefits of services, or I guess some other use cases that we commonly see people use, is for extraneous services. So things like, powder coating, delivery charges, all that. There's a lot of uses. And even for anything that involves labor services that you don't necessarily handle internally. So again, using our kitchen manufacturer as an example, contract installers, for example, would be a perfect example of a service. So the main difference between the three is materials and services are, I guess, your generic catalog items. So they'll have SKUs that are relative to your supplier, or you will purchase order them, you'll buy them in, you'll bring them into inventory, you will utilize them. They can be used up as either as sundries or as part of the manufacturing process. And the use case for these is virtually infinite. So everything from screws and glues and silicon you buy from Bunnings, through to the raw materials you buy from your direct suppliers, such as boards or sheets of metal or alley channeling, right through to virtually anything and everything in between, hardware, appliances, the whole lot. Products are slightly different. Products currently are designed around internal usage. They are a culmination of parts, labor, components, materials, services that can be used to greatly speed up quoting and create some transparency around your process. So a good example of a product would be a base one door cabinet. It has parts. Those parts are made of materials. There's a labor component that goes into manufacturing that. There's services sometimes involved for contract installation. So that's a good example of how you can use products to take your catalog items and put them into a group that makes quoting really easy and really fast. And the best thing about products in Jobman is that they can have some smarts built around them, such as style items and parametrics. So as you stretch and make the product bigger and smaller, the material pricing itself shifts, which is excellent. But as I said, we won't cover that too much today. That's a whole thing in itself. But just wanted to sort of provide a bit of understanding around what you're setting up here. What are the benefits? What are the differences and what are the benefits? And the three biggest benefits from your catalog in your materials and services, obviously, like I said, is the ability to now control and manage your pricing, keep everything transparent in one place. Number two, fast purchase ordering. We have everything there. So as we create and develop jobs, we can take those raw materials and services, they become purchase orderable, and that leads to the last major benefit, which is inventory control and then reporting, actual job costing. So we're not just quoting blind and throwing light items into a quote and then some simplified systems, I know that's how they operate. Jobman is a very detailed manufacturing service. We want you to be able to break down at the end of the job the labor and the materials and services used to produce that, so you can know your true profitability. So what is inventory? I think inventory for most people is pretty straightforward. Some people might call this warehousing. This is all of your raw materials available on hand. These are designed to basically ensure that you have what we call a stock source for the system. Now, the advantage of a stock source is twofold. Number one, it means that when we're sourcing inside our raw materials for our jobs, Jobman has the smarts to be able to do what's called an inventory check. It can run through your inventory first and make sure or I guess see if you have those materials there already. I mean, there's no point purchase ordering more materials if you're already sitting on them in your warehouse. And there's a lot of smarts in the system built around that. So we've spent a lot of time making sure that the inventory management is very precise. And it aligns with your catalog items, with the primary link there being that SKU. And we'll cover that in the demonstration, so that's really clear for everybody. But that's your benefit of your inventory. It also allows the opportunity for you to let your team know digitally what is actually on hand. Now, when I mean what is actually on hand, one of the great things about Jobman is you can add raw material resources and services to your jobs. So that means when allocating those materials, whether they come from stock or purchase order, it's visible to the team that those goods are going to be used up in that job, which means when you're looking at the inventory management service, you can actually tell the difference. There will be job numbers listed. In fact, we separate the line items of common goods so that you can see very clearly and very easily what is actually available. So you might have, for example, 20 sheets sitting on the in bay location B2, for example, but you don't actually have 20 sheets because 18 of them have been allocated to jobs. So our inventory management really highlights that and will show that you've got 18 currently assigned to jobs and only 2 available. And that information can be shared in the kiosk mode. So this is, I know we covered kiosk mode in a previous webinar. It's a fantastic functionality of Jobman. It's how we communicate with the team, but it has a lot of other benefits. And one of the biggest benefits is transparency to the team, letting them know. So they don't have to come up to you and ask you, is this available? They can see, and you can have that on a dedicated one person, so a store person that controls that kiosk, or you can just make it available to the whole team. So they can all see all the time, yep, I can see 20 sheets sitting in bay location 2. However, 18 of them are used. There's really only 2 there. If something's gone wrong or stuffed up, I need to now put through a job alert and let the team know so we can purchase order some more in. So there's a lot of benefits around our inventory control management. So the primary difference there is, and this is a common question we get, is the catalog itself is just the everything. It's the all availability. That's why it's quite often referred to as availability chart. It's all the items that you can possibly ever buy from your supplier. It doesn't necessarily mean you've got them in stock. It doesn't mean you've necessarily purchase ordered them. It just means that that supplier produces those items and you have the opportunity via account or dealing with them to purchase those items. Whereas inventory is where your actual stock is on hand. And it has a running record of that information, which means it's continuously updating your stock reports. So you have a running total of how much you're sitting on an inventory management at any time, which is a very important metric for a lot of companies. And that's the primary difference, the ability to see the actual versus the possible, I guess, in the most straightforward sense. So now I'd like to jump in and do a bit of a demonstration for you on some of the key functionality around those two areas, and hopefully provide some tips and tricks to help you to get your catalog set up fast, because it's a very good early step that you can take to get the most out of the software. There's a couple of ways of achieving that. So we're definitely going to have a look at those today, and also how to then start managing your inventory as well. I think it's a very good thing to get up and running early on with Jobman to make sure that the system is doing its best for you. So let's dive in and have a look here. So we're back in our Lunch and Learn series, Jobman version here, and you can see that already I've got a little bit sitting in my catalog. For a lot of the seeded sites, we have put some basic catalog items in your system just to give you a bit of a reference point to make this a little bit faster and a little bit easier for your setup, just so you've got some examples in there. And we tried to make them relevant to each industry. But I think most people understand how these work once you sort of get a good understanding around this area. So you can see, as mentioned, that it is broken into three areas. You've got materials, you've got services, and you've got products for your internal reference points. Like I said, we're not going to cover this too much today. We're going to focus mostly on materials and services. So one of the first and easiest ways to get your catalog up to date is to import CSVs. And this is a pretty common way most companies sort of work. Our recommendation for getting this up and running nice and fast is to download the CSV, which I'm about to show you in a moment, and send that out to your suppliers. And if you've got good suppliers and reps, it won't be too hard for them to export their catalog library services for you. And if they're really good, they'll filter them into the right headings for you. If not, you might have to do a little bit of work, but nothing too major. It's important to note here that Jobman is very flexible. There's a lot of data storage available to you. So there's no real limitation on how big this catalog can get. And I've seen clients with up to 50,000 items in here. However, for most people, especially when you get started, you probably won't buy everything all the time from your supplier. So a good reference point when talking to your suppliers about getting this information into the system is definitely to discuss with them the possibility of maybe just bringing in the last 6 months or year of your purchase ordables. I mean, if you buy 10% of their catalog range, there's no real point having 13,500 items in there, although you might buy it at some point. So there's definitely no harm there having it in the system. But yeah, that's just a good first tip and trick is when talking to your suppliers, if you can just get the purchase orderable amounts in that you've dealt with over the last year, that will certainly speed this process up. Now, I'd like to show you a little bit of the navigation here quickly, and then I'm going to show you some really good ways to enter these details. So on the left-hand side here, you'll see what we call categories. Now, categories have a lot of benefits in our software. Categories are the way to lump catalog available chart items together easily so they can be quickly filtered to find that information. But they have other benefits. And two of the other primary benefits of categories is the second point in which you can manage pricing. I'm going to show you that in the settings. So you might have an overarch price built into Jobman for your quoting, and then you decide that you'd like to narrow down that information a little bit more. Categories is that first step point. The other benefit of categories is how we allow the system to break apart your two most common types of availability chart. And what I mean by that is anything that's handled by sheet and virtually everything else. So Jobman has a lot of smarts around it. It can handle packs, it can handle each rates, pairs, etc. I'm going to show you a few of those examples. But it can also handle sheets, which are a very common raw material in virtually every manufacturing sector. It doesn't matter whether it's board or sheet metal or anything like that. A lot of raw materials come in what's called a sheet. Now, typically that pricing is based on what's called a square meter price. However, when it comes to inventory management, we're not interested in the square meters. We don't tell our staff, oh, for job 0003, please go down and get me 26.34 meters squared of this item, or 22.8 linear meters of this channeling. We say, go grab 5 sheets. So Jobman works the same way. So that's one of the first really good superpowers of categories. And I'm going to show you where that is. So before we dive into the catalog, you get a good understanding of that. So under the settings, inside catalog, our first configuration for pricing and how we're going to mark up these items, and this is worth doing just before you start getting your catalog in, because this will start dictating how the software works going forward, is we can put in some generic overhead, wastage, and profit. So what this means at this top level under settings, catalog pricing, is every time I bring a material, any of my materials or services from my available my catalog items, I then have the ability that Jobman will automatically add a profit percentage. And this is true profit, not markup, true profit, although overhead and wastage is markup. So this means that as a general rule of thumb, if my business works on a 20% profit margin, a markup, sorry, this is how I'm able to then set that pricing in one place. It affects the whole software. However, for a lot of companies, that's not detailed enough. We want a lot of automation, and we'll certainly cover a lot more of this in the quoting, but I think it's important to look at this information now because it's very useful. So the second breakdown point to that is categories. And the reason we use categories is because you might end up with, let's just say, 50,000 items in your catalog. The last thing we want you to have to do is set that price up on every single material. Can you imagine if there's a price change, you would have to go through at fixed price and change 50,000 items. Now, it's not to say that in the catalog you can't set up some fixed price options, but as a good tip for our software, it is definitely designed around variable pricing. It makes your life easy, because then if you ever want to change something, you only need to manage it from one point. And categories are very useful. And I'm going to show you a category so I can explain 2 things at once. The category I'm going to use is MDF. Most of you would know what MDF is. It's board, and it's a product typically used in joinery, but you can think of this as sheet metal or anything that gets bought at a square meter rate that you want converted to sheets. So this category is MDF, and this functionality here is what then allows Jobman to take a square meter board and convert it to sheets for handling. So this is very important. For all of your hardware, accessories, sundries, etc., all those sorts of items, this is not something you'll need to tick on because you buy them in each or pairs or packs. You know what I mean? If you think about a tube of silicon, you might buy 12 tubes of silicon and then you use 1 tube of silicon at a time. So that's fine. But anything where you've got a board structure or a sheet structure and you buy it at a square meter rate and it needs to be converted to sheets for handling, this is very important. You can make sure this is ticked on. And the beauty of our system is, again, by utilizing categories, I simply choose this category, I choose this, and now every material that gets added to my catalog under this category will automatically do that conversion. So one spot, a lot of influence. The second benefit here is the ability now to start tweaking that overarching pricing. The way Jobman works, and this is a really good trick, is, or a good tip to know, I should say, if these fields are blank, it will defer to your overarching pricing. So I have not touched the profit margin here. So that means every time I add a material of the category MDF, it will defer to my profit margin, which is 20%. I'm happy with that. I set that up at the beginning. It's not a problem. However, based on certain material types, I may have more or less overhead and wastage. And I'll give you 2 really good examples. So in this example, this board, I have an allowance in my system set up to give me 5% overhead and 5% wastage. So that means if the cost of this board is $10 a square meter, it will times it by 1.05, so we'll add 50 cents. It will times it by 1.05 again, add another 50 cents, so it's $11, and that's what's called my allowance for that material. Then it will add the profit margin. It will set the price of this material every time I bring it in to a quote or use it in my system. That's the sell price it will set it up. So you can see by just putting a couple of pieces of information into Jobman, it can affect a large amount of your catalog immediately. However, if this was a grain board, there is a lot more wastage involved. So for all my category where I bring in grain boards that can only be cut one way, I might have a 12% allowance on my pricing markup, simply because there's a lot more wastage that goes involved in buying those boards. So this is, again, I can make a category called grain MDF, and then every time I assign a catalog item to that category, it's affected by that pricing, which is excellent. The reversed example of that would be hardware. So you might have an overhead allowance, and this sort of covers, the team when they're unpacking trucks and putting things on shelves, and a little bit of loss of stock. You know what I mean? That's there just as that coverall point, so that you're getting a more accurate costing before you apply your profit. You do not have to use these. You can leave these blank. You can have them at zero, and you can load everything into your profit margin if you want. Jobman is very flexible. Not a problem there. But in the instance of hardware, for example, maybe hinges, or poles for fencing, or appliances such as motors, etc., I have very little to no wastage. If I buy 10 tubes of silicon, I will use those 10 tubes of silicon. It's not like I throw silicon out. So in those examples, I wouldn't have a wastage amount in here. I would just have an overhead and a profit margin. But you can see the beauty of this is just one area, settings, under the categories. I can control all that pricing really easily. So what does that mean for my catalog? Well, it means, number one, now I've got a really good filtration point for my categories. And obviously, the less categories you have, the better. But it's up to you. You can have as many as you want. And it also means now, let me show you an example of a catalog item. When I'm entering my catalog into the system, all of the pricing comparison I need is already set up just by hand or by variable. So this is how I can have a catalog of 50,000 items, and I don't have to individually manage the price of all of them, which is great. The other areas in here which are really important, and I'm sure most of them make a lot of sense, but I think it's worth just noting what they all are so you get a good understanding, is of course the name of the product. SKU is extremely important. This is the supplier number that they will give you. This is how we individualize catalog items, especially materials for ordering. That's the most common point at which suppliers need that information. That's one of the most important. In fact, is one of the only areas where you absolutely have to have this filled out to be able to import, which I'll show you in a second. The category here. So in this one, I've expanded my categories into 3 sections. So I don't just have MDF. I also have MDF plain, MDF grain, so I can get more granular control over my pricing. So you can put some notes in here. Brand, range, finish, and color are non-essential items for importing. That's worth mentioning, but they are good information to have. Some suppliers wrap this information up in the name, so we certainly don't want you to spend thousands of hours of your life breaking that apart into different headings. But if you would like more control over your stock and really to be able to see what all these items are broken down, then these are good fields to fill out as well. And for example, a lot of suppliers will utilize a typical supplier. They are the supplier, but they might have 2 major brands they supply you with, and being able to separate those may impact your pricing. So we have all that functionality there ready to go. We can handle all the typical length and volumetric and mass units around anything you might deal with. So in this example, this is a sheet of board. It comes at a standardized length of 2400 by 1200 by 1600 millimeters, but you could easily enter items that are based on mass or volume. We have all those options in here. If you want to see what is available, you can always just click down, or as always, this information is available in the help menu for you. So if I skip over something a little bit fast, don't worry, you can cover that as well. And then this is the one where I tend to find a lot of people come back and put in some support tickets about. So I wanted to explain this one because this is quite important. So there's a lot of smarts around the way Jobman's catalog handles, not just simply a case of I have a hinge, it's this price. That's it. That's all Jobman can handle. That's most typical systems. That's as far as we go. We are a far better system than that, and we operate at a better detailed level to help you for your manufacturing. So that means we have the ability to break down a couple of things. The first one is the example I've used previously, which is our square meter to sheet rate. So we have a sheet price here. There are 2.88 units inside one sheet. How did I get that number? Most of you would be pretty comfortable with the idea that if something is based on square meter, if I take the length and width and divide them out, that's how I can calculate how many square meter units I get per sheet. And then, of course, I have the square meter price. Now, the beautiful thing about Jobman is so long as these dimensions are put in, when it comes to sheet or board handling, you only need two pieces of information here and it will be able to work it out. So I can either enter the units per item and the square meter rate and leave this blank and tell it's going to be a sheet, and Jobman will automatically calculate that price. Or I can work backwards. I can put in the sheet price, tell it how many units per item they're going to be, and it will work out a square meter rate. Now, what is units per item? And I know this is going to come up because you're going to start using the download and you're going to get very excited and put all your items in. So I think this is a really good understanding point. So units per item. The item is the catalog item. So the catalog item might be one sheet. The catalog item might be one hinge. The catalog item also might be a pack or a pallet or a tin. So that's the item, what you're actually physically buying. This is the SKU we're going to use to give to the supplier down the track when we buy this item. However, because a lot of the items you buy come in some form of bulk, it may be a pack of 100 hinges, for example. When you're doing your jobs in your raw material resources, Jobman has to be smart enough to be able to handle the idea that you're not going to use the whole pack. So you might use 2 hinges on that job or 40 hinges on that job. So units per item is the number of units you get when you purchase that item. So that's how I can tell the system that I've got, and I'll show you an example in a minute of a pack. If this was a pack size, there might be 100, and the unit price is this divided by 100. And that gives me my each price. So now I can add them into my quoting, not a problem, and I can handle, I can add 10 or 20 at a time. But if I have to buy a pack, when it comes to purchase ordering, and we will cover this later, but it's a good foundational understanding point now, when I buy those items, Jobman will collate all of that information, put it together and say, okay, we need 20 for that job, 20 for that job, 20 for that job. I have to buy a pack, roll them up. There's 60. Place the item order, which is the item itself, which is the pack of 100. Keep 60 aside for these jobs and put 40 into stock. So that's the smarts there. And this is a good one to talk about because this is really important. And these sheet rates can be anything. So if you buy bigger sheets, if you buy this, you can buy this in say a 3600 as well, or an 18 mil, you can simply affect this number and it will modify the sheet pricing. The other two important bits of information on here are optimization. Only very useful for anything that you're planning on linking to your products. And we have two optimizations right now. One is square meter and one is lineal meter. Square meter for your sheets or your boards, lineal meter for things like edge tape or channeling. Good examples. If it's hardware or sundry items or appliances or anything like that, simply ignore this. There's no need for optimization. You buy one, you sell one. Nice and easy. And then the last one is this status, not available to order. Now, I'm not going to go into that status right now, but I am going to give you a brief explanation for what it means. Essentially, the not available to order status is linked to a brand you'll notice in your system called quote pricing. Now, we're going to cover all that later, but basically, whenever you see this little circle with this cross out, that's what that means. It's not available to physically order. It's used for quote pricing. So you won't be able to add this to a purchase order and send it off because there's no SKU attached to it, no supplier. What we do want to be able to do is we do want to be able to create these orderable items. So I'm going to show you the two best methodologies to get Catalogue into your system really fast. So the first one is just entering it. So if you do not have a massive catalog and you generally run the same sort of items as much of, constantly over time, so you got like 50 you use all the time for your manufacturing process, you can just enter those 50. You don't need to go after your catalog, do, work out imports and go to all your suppliers. If you just want to whack them in, you can do it. It won't take you that long. So there's a couple of options here when we have catalog items. Of course, this is how you delete, set as preferred and not preferred. I'm going to cover preferred in a moment. But one of the really good things you can do with this item is if you have a similar item, this is why we put some in there for you, I can make you a copy of the item rather than start from scratch, which means I can start filling out some details. Now, the reason I'm using this one as an example is because this is a very common example of a board range. Right now, it's not available to order. It's just used for my quoting. So I need to actually put in the item I will order. So I can make a copy. give it an SKU, which is the actual supplier's SKU, and all that information will be available. I can choose my category in this example because I've copied it. I've saved myself a lot of data entry, but you could easily drop this down. The most important thing here, though, is I will need to actually put it in and connect it up to a supplier. If the supplier I'm looking for is not currently available, not a problem. I can, add them on the fly and put them into the system. And now that supplier has been added to my contacts and I go fill their details out later. So nice and easy. You can put some notes if there's some relevant information around this catalog. And of course, the brand here is not going to be quote pricing. This actual board is part of a brand called Formica. So we're going to add that in, nice and easy. We've got range, we've got colors. If I had colors in here, I could use that drop down and choose from colors. Otherwise, you can just start typing. It's got to finish. Now, all the detail rates are the same here. However, when I actually buy this from my supplier, rather than a quote pricing, it's an actual price. So you can see there, because it knows the dimensions of the item, I've told it how many units per item there will be, and I've told you told the system what each of those things are. I can enter the price either way, and it will calculate for me. Nice and easy. If you get stuck with this, please do check the help documents. There's a lot of information around this. I know this is a pretty big area, but it's worth noting. My optimization is square meter. However, in this case, this is the actual item I will order. So now I've added a new material into my system. And this is the actual SKU ready to go. This means that every time I add this material to raw materials, I can utilize this item. What are favorites? Very quickly. Favorites are the ability to take quote pricing options and then add in actual, I guess, breakdowns or like direct information orders that can be used instead of the quote pricing option. Again, we'll cover all this later, but I just wanted to show you this quickly. What this will do for me is when I add a quote pricing option in and I pull that board through now, Jobman will automatically say, okay, we can't order that because it's not available to order. However, here is a list of my substitutes for that. And in this example, I might have my 16mm Laminex and my 16mm Polytech, or if you're in another country, you'd have another supplier. That would be those options there. And this just adds a little bit of speed to setting things up for purchase ordering. So that's your materials. Now, what's the easy way of doing that on bulk? And of course, the easiest way to do it is with importing. So as I said at the beginning, one of the first things you can do when you're setting up your Jobman is go into Catalog, Materials, Imports, New, download this CSV. This CSV has our headings set in a way we want this information. And you can download this copy and make several copies of it, send it out to your suppliers, and then they can start filling out the majority of this information. If the information they send back is not exactly in our format, don't worry. You can easily, generally speaking, filter it and copy and paste it into the right areas. The main things we're looking for are the 5 most important parts of that information, which are the name, the SKU, dimensions where relevant, and then that price per unit, the unit ID, and then the units per item price. As long as you put that information in, the import will come in. I've got an example for you today, just to show you how easy it can be. It's not a massive example, but I've sent out my CSV to one of our fantastic suppliers, Hafley, and said, look, I'd like to get my catalog in so I can start using Jobman. They've sent back the information, and I've put that into these headings for this CSV. I can use some smarts here so that if, rather than me have to go through and physically create categories or brands or finishes, Jobman will pick those up on import, which is huge, and then bring them in. Be wary of this function here. It is very dangerous. There's a warning that comes up with it. Basically, if I was to click this functionality, if I brought the import in, anything not on that importer would get blown away or get deleted, which is a bit scary. So there are a few warnings around that when you go to use it, but it is a way of, if you accidentally stuff up and import things a couple of times accidentally, it is one way of breaking these down and then quickly removing some of that information. But my recommendation is always do it manual and just be careful to begin with, and you'll be fine. The last thing I'll mention around the CSV is there's no need for you to wait for all of your suppliers to send back their information. So if you have, say, 10 suppliers and you send this CSV out to 10 of your suppliers and one brings it back to you, you can caress the data, bring it in. Next one comes back to you, bring it in. You can do this as many times as you want. In fact, it's better for the system to not be handling more than about 3,500 line items. I'm sure you've used Excel before. before, once you get past a certain number of line items, the system starts to struggle, and that's a Microsoft product. Ours is no different. Importing via cloud means once you reach a certain point, too much data will cause some headaches. So I'll create this import, and you can see it's all set up, ready to go. Just confirms that that's the information you want. I start the import. Depending on the size of this file will impact the speed. Generally speaking, it's pretty quick. If you do under 1,000 items at a time, it's quite fast. In this example, I've got 20, but it's usually very quick to get this information in. Obviously, the bigger the file, the longer it can take. So just be warned, it is better to do this in smaller chunks rather than in one large area. But now I've brought those materials in. That was quick and easy. I now have new categories available to me, which is waste bins. Don't ask me why I chose waste bin. I'm just looking for a really good example. And you can see quickly and easily, I've brought in the name of the products. I have the SKUs, suppliers, they're in their category, and their pricing ready to go. And this is a fantastic example here as well, is where I set up a pack pricing. So for this particular bin, so this is the other example outside of boards, you have to buy this in a pack, and it's a pack of 10. So it's $3,660 per pack. I tell Jobman that the units per item is 10. There's 10 units to that item. And Jobman worked out for me that the pricing was $366 each. Nice and easy. So that's the fastest and the easiest way to get your material library up to date, is a CSV importer. Of course, you can manually enter them, but this is a really quick way of doing it. This number will start increasing. You've got some filtration. And of course, as you start bringing in suppliers, you have that ability to start filtering this information. And when exporting and importing, and becomes easy to filter by that supplier. So the last part I'll mention about this before we move on is one of the greatest benefits of this is not only can you import, but you can export. So if one of your suppliers came to you and said, look, due to unforeseen circumstances, we're putting a 5% increase on an entire range, rather than have to worry about going through all of these potentially tens of thousands of catalog items individually, you can easily export this, make the pricing change. You can filter by the supplier, filter by the brand, times by 1.05, copy and paste over the top, and then suck that data straight back into Jobman. In under a few minutes, you've just updated your entire catalog library. Really powerful. And this is how we help a lot of businesses keep on top of their catalog. So the second example I'm going to use here is a service. Very similar process again. You can import them, but I just wanted to quickly show you building one so you get an idea of some of the use cases here. So I'm going to create a service which is electrical work. Quite commonly, we'll project manage that as part of our fit out. So I've got a supplier, Dave's Electrical. You can build a category in here if you need to. Most people will have a few categories again for their suppliers. So I'm going to call this electrical. That way I can keep all my services together, whether they be electrical, plumbing, delivery, etc. Notes I can put in. And then again, same sort of concept, except there's a few more options in here, which basically means it's very easy to set up those hour rates, day rates, kilometer rates, etc. However those services come through. Again, I can default to my standard here, or I can update it directly on the item, or I can upgrade it on the category. So lots of options here, available to order. So Dave charges out 150 per hour. I use my standard pricing default markup, which is 20%. So I don't need to enter that. That's been covered at the beginning. And there we go. I've got some services, and I could build as many services as I needed for Dave's Electrical. So that's also worth noting. I don't necessarily just have to rely on one. There might be different rates. You might do I know a lot of spray painters, for example, or powder coaters work either by piece rate or by hour or by volume. And depending on the job, they will charge you differently. I can easily build those 3 different services into Jobman and then utilize those going forward. If you have a lot of services and you want to do the import thing again, you absolutely can. And that is another fast way of bringing in those services. Just follow those headings, make sure you've got that key information lined up, and you can bring those in, and they're available for you. So the last part, of course, is then what about the inventory? How do I add some of these items to inventory so I can start taking advantage of Jobman Smarts? Now, it's very easy. Because Jobman is a cloud-based program and it's mobile responsive, this can be utilized on a laptop or a PC or a tablet or a phone. You can very easily build your inventory the first time into Jobman. I'm going to mention one caveat. My recommendation to clients is don't digitally enter your inventory into Jobman until you're basically ready to go as a full service. What I mean by that is if you start putting in your inventory now and you're still building your catalog and you're still working out your jobs and how to build those raw materials, what's going to happen is very quickly over the next couple of weeks while you're putting that information together in Jobman, your inventory is going to go out of whack, which means you're going to have to redo it. So my recommendation to most companies is inventory should be one of the last steps in setting up your Jobman. Virtually set everything else up, start using the program, start running those contacts and leads and quotes into your job management, your capacity and your scheduling, pushing out your information, the agenda screens, get that rolling first, and then set up your inventory last. But I want to show it to you today so you know what it is. And if you do want to get in there, you can dive in there. So nice and easy. One of the best things about this is as soon as you go into the inventory, it's going to start pulling through these materials. So let's find one of the materials we added in today. I can add in that I've got 10 in stock. Absolutely fantastic. Ready to go. That easy. That's adding inventory items to your inventory. Those will now be available if I run a job and I want to do some auto sourcing, which we'll cover in future episodes. I have that information at my fingertips. I can also update this at any time, so it's very easy to update and change. We have other functionality built into the software, such as bay locations. You'll also notice that with your software, you have 2 locations available to you, so you can split items between warehouse and factories. Keep in mind that if you do that, it's very important that when you're sourcing and purchase ordering, the system is going to be very particular. It's going to try and pull it from the area you are, but I can set up a bay location for this information. So I keep my system clean. Everyone knows where to find it. I don't need to enter any other details. All this comes from the catalog. So this is why setting up the catalog first is so important. Now, you're going to ask me a question. I'm going to cover it now before we move forward and wrap this up. And that is, why is there not an importer for my inventory? And it's a very common question we get. And the answer at the moment is quite simple. And that is because the system is extremely particular around SKUs. What we're doing in this process is we're linking the actual catalog materials themselves to an inventory item. And there's a lot of smarts behind that, which we'll cover in future webinars. Smarts including, the ability to source into purchase ordering. There's a lot of functionality around that link. So currently, the system is designed to be a manual process. So there can't be any stuff up. We can't accidentally, just bring in an item and our field might be slightly different. And now suddenly all your auto sourcing doesn't work, all that sort of stuff. That is not to say that we might not build one in the future. So I wanted to cover that now. At the time of this webinar, which is March 24, there isn't currently an import service. We may build one in the future. We'll have to be very careful in how we think about building that. Make sure we've got the right smarts up for the link, but it's very important that those links are there because this is what makes the system work. And you need this. This is the beauty of this link is it provides not just a lot of automation around purchase ordering and stock management control, but this is the key foundation to your reporting. Ultimately, you have a system here, and whether you came to us looking to improve your inventory management or your quoting or your scheduling or your capacity, it doesn't matter. One of the end goals for virtually every company that looks for a system like this is reporting. And so in order to be able to give you accurate, detailed reporting, we need to make sure that the system is really clean and really precise. But there you go. That's how easy it is. So once you get your catalog in, you can start affecting your inventory. You'll notice here that there is no job allocation to this item. Therefore, it's free. It's ready for stock, which means when the system uses its smarts and goes looking for sourcing, it's looking for these items which are not allocated. If I did have some of these catalog items linked in to a job, they would appear here. So lots of transparency, a lot of functionality. I know this has been a big one, so I hope you certainly got a lot out of it. I'd like now to dive in and answer a few questions. If you need to go and you felt like you've got enough out of this webinar, absolutely thank you very much for your time. As always, as mentioned at the beginning, we will be putting this up online, so you'll be able to access it and review that information and share it with the team if you need to. If you're looking for more details on the items covered today, as always, jump into your app. It's all in the help documents. Everything there I explained today about units and imports and pricing and what fields are necessary is all there. But as you can see, once you sort of can see how easy it is to bring those items in, it becomes a very quick and fairly painless process, which can add a lot of information, a lot of power to your software. So it's a good one to get up and running early. So if you have to go, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to jump now on some questions. We've still got a few minutes up our sleeve and get those covered. I hope you have a fantastic day, but if you do hang around, I'm sure there's some good ones in here. So let's jump on those now. How do you calculate pricing for quote pricing items? Fantastic question. So I'll be covering quote pricing items in a future webinar, because it is quite an important part of the quoting process. But as a general rule of thumb, the way quote pricing works is quote pricing is the brand. So it still is linked to that all-important information that we covered at the beginning, which is categories. So even though the quote pricing item might be board, or the quote pricing item might be sheets of metal, or it might be chain links, or it might be fasteners, doesn't matter. They can all be quote pricing as a brand. That's the brand you use to impact your quote pricing. What's important for the system is what category are those catalog items? Are they boards? Are they sheets? Are they hardware? Are they services? Are they electrical? So it will pull its pricing from that. So the first place it looks is settings, catalog pricing, the overarch. So all materials. That'll affect every material you add to any quote. And then the second breakdown it looks for is the category area. So that's why those categories are so important. Rather than have to worry about, detail managing pricing of 30,000 potential items, you can simply change your category, and it will affect all those catalog items in that category, which is awesome. How do you manage pack ordering for items that already have unit information? Flat bar, 6.5 meters long, needs to be ordered in slings of 16. I don't really understand that one directly. I think that would be something better probably handled with the training team or support team. Definitely put that through as a support ticket. That might need a little bit more information. I'm pretty sure we can handle that. Units. Yeah, that one I'd put through as a support. That's a bit more of a detailed questioning, but I'm sure the support team will be able to help you with that one. I just don't understand the term sling, because I'm sure I could work it out for you. But yeah, put that one through. Definitely, that's a good question. You'd be amazed what the system can handle. We can handle packs. We can even handle volumetric units. So you might buy, for example, a tin of paint, and it's 20 litres. So you can put that item in as the item is 20 litres. Paint. However, every time you do a spray set, use about 200 mils. So you can break it down into 200 mil lots. And if you've got that applied to your products, every time that product gets added, it will add that in lots of 200 mils, which is awesome. It means at the end of the job, you can look at it and you can say, well, for this job, we need 800 mils. This job, we need 800 mils. We can just buy one tin and cover both those jobs. Or this job needs 5 litres, this one needs 800, for example. So that's where the pack breakdown is extremely useful. How to add services with conditional charges. Freight charge only for orders under minimum order value. Currently, we don't do conditional configuration in our software. As much as possible, we like to avoid making things complicated. Reason being is every time you add a layer of complication, and conditional formatting is obviously something that is extremely difficult to program, we try and avoid entering those items there, because it colludes, I guess, the foundation of the software, which is to make your life easier. So as always, there's always a bit of judgment call involved with a catalog item. For example, we've got a square optimization built into our system. So our system's smart enough to know that if you add 6 or 7 products together and it adds up to be 6.7 sheets, you're obviously going to override to 7, because you can't buy 6.7. So we do our best. We give you the best information we can, and then you can use that. My recommendation is, if you have those charges, build all those charges into the services, and then utilize the substitutes. It's a really good power platform, so that you can put in the service, and the service charge will be X plus X plus X, much like you do with an Excel spreadsheet. Put those services in, add them to your quotes. They'll all pull through for the purchase ordering. And again, they can be utilized with presets, which is really good. And then you just make the judgment call when you're in there. So if you know, for example, that this needs to be rapid freight, you can choose the service for rapid freight, and that amount will come in. So that's the idea behind the system. The more information you give it, the more power it has, but we do our best as much as possible to never allow the software to make decisions on your behalf, because that's dangerous. The minute you start dealing with conditional formatting, you're expecting a system to make a calculation which might not do right, and then that will stuff your numbers up, and we certainly don't want to do that. So the best thing is to definitely enter those services and those products and those catalog items, and then give yourself a few options. A common one I've heard of is how do you handle conditional purchasing as well. So if a supplier has an SKU and they have three prices, but they have a price if I buy it in a single, price if I buy it in 99, and a price if I buy it in 100 plus. And because they're all the same SKU, how does the system handle it? My recommendation to everyone is enter that item as a non-orderable item, and then put the three substitutes underneath it. So that way, when you go to add the item to a quote, you've got your price and it's covered. And obviously, when you're quoting, you'll always quote using the most expensive price, which would be the single option. And then you can utilize the substitutes, then say, well, in this particular order, we've got 99, we're going to do it. But yeah, I hope that answers that question. Conditional formatting is always a fun one for programmers to deal with. But the system's pretty smart. There's a lot of stuff going in there. I think you'll be pretty happy with it. On linked inventory items, if I change the description of the catalog, will it change my inventory? Great question. Currently, no. Very intentional. If you make changes to your catalog items, your inventory links will break. And that's part of the reason we don't have the importer. It's obviously very difficult to make sure that information aligns. So one thing we are looking at, and that is a very good question, is we'd like to create what's called a sync. So this could mean that potentially if you do change a linked item, it would come through and give you a warning, and then you can actually sync it. So you can make changes to your catalog and impact your inventory. But you've got to remember that inventory itself is static, whereas catalog items are fluid. So one of the most common things that will happen is your catalog items are going to change price a lot. Which is really important. You know, that's the supplier pricing going up and down all the time. Whereas your inventory is not so caring about that price default, if that makes sense. You've bought it, it's sitting there, it's there to be used. So we need to make sure that with the links for those items are very straightforward. And then when something changes, that catalog can then get the inventory is not affected by those changes. Like you might change supplier and all that sort of behavior. That's a catalog problem, not an inventory problem. So we delink those as soon as any of that information changes for that reason. Now, we might change that in the future, like I said, and opt in for a sync so you can keep those two data points up to date all together, which I think would be awesome. But right now, we've made it very strict just to give you the best benefit of the software. And then we might loosen those rules over time, which is cool. If I receive a material item on a purchase order, will an inventory record be added for that item automatically? Absolutely. And I didn't get a chance to mention that because we're covered purchase ordering down the track. But yes, so what will happen is if you place a purchase order, any of those items that come into stock will be linked into the inventory, and they'll be linked in, like I said, those two areas. So either they'll have a job number attached to them, or they will be for stock, or a combination of both. So receiving them in will do that. Now, what it won't do, no, that's fine. That covers that question straightforwardly, which is good. So yes, they will come in automatically into your inventory. So that is one of the benefits of that. And you can just place stock orders. So that is actually a really fast way of bulking up your inventory as well without having to set everything up. Too particularly is once you start getting your orders in, start receiving them, it'll start bulking your inventory. That's a good moving forward point with the system. Minimum stock quantities, are they coming? Yes, absolutely. Now, we have every intention to bring minimum stock quantities into the software. I'm going to give you the exact reason why they're not in there right now. The reason is minimum stock quantities can be a little bit dangerous. Example, you have 5 jobs. You place 10 boards for each of those jobs, which means you need 100 boards. Currently in stock, you have 0 boards. You have a minimum stock quantity set to 100 boards. Jobman does its job. It orders you 200 boards. Takes a week to get there. During that period, another job comes in, and that job is for 10 boards. And then another 10 boards. And you go to place that purchase order. And what happens is Jobman looks at that and goes, currently sitting in our inventory, because those 100 stock items have not arrived, we have no inventory. You want 20 boards. I now need to order you 120 boards because your minimum stock point. You get where I'm going. So it's a very, very dangerous functionality. It sounds really simple and really amazing, and it is 100%. But one of the things we have to be very careful about when we build features into our system is what are the repercussions and what damage can it do potentially to your ERP and your business. You can imagine 5 people place those orders over 5 days. You'll end up with $10 million worth of stock. You won't be very happy with us. So that's the bad news. Not available right now. The good news is we actually have a plan to fix both problems at once, and that's why we haven't released the minimum stock quantities. We would like to be able to, in fact, we have scoped out the ability to add purchase orderable items as a check run versus purchase ordered items. So what that would mean is it would give you that functional power to be able to say we have a minimum stock quantity, and that minimum stock quantity is say 100 units. However, it can run a check and say you've got 100 units coming. Don't fill that order again. And that's what we need. Once we have that second part, we're happy to release the first part. But yeah, no, they definitely will come, but that's why they're not in there right now. E.g. sheets that need to be ordered in quantity amounts. I'm with you. Thank you, Jess. That makes more sense. So can I order slings? Yep. So the way typically our system, and this is a very common one, I get this all the time, is think of the other catalog item as the definitive SKU, which basically means it is the item. When entering it into your system, you want to put it in at the baseline price, which is the most expensive way in which you can buy it, which would be a single sheet. Now, I fully get that in almost every business we deal with, most people aren't going to buy that item in a single sheet if it's a commonality, if it's something you use all the time, like channeling or metal or boards. What you're going to do is you're going to buy the pack of 30 or 60 or 100 because that gives you the best rate. So the idea behind our system is the catalog item is there as the singular, it links to the direct SKU, it has the worst case scenario price. When you actually place the purchase order, you can go in and you can set those that amount, and you could build a substitute for the pack. So that would mean rather than just ordering the single, we're going to order the pack of, say, 30 or the sling of 30, and that's going to give us the best price, and you can have a different price for that. The reason we don't link it to that SKU is because that SKU is very particular. The SKU is the supplier number linked directly to that item, and that's why it becomes very difficult programmatically to tell a system conditional formatting. That's basically the fundamental issue is whether you buy it in 1, 30, 60, or 90, the SKU is the same. So how do you tell the system which one to order? You know what I mean? It's just very difficult for it to do programmatically. So that's the one manual step in that process would be, you would add, say, 5 of those channels to a job. And when you go to purchase order, all this will be covered later on the purchase ordering side of things, but you would add those 5 items to a purchase order. And then on that purchase order, you would use the substitute to change it out to the pack of 30 because it gives you the best price. So it's a very long answer, but long answer short, no, it won't do it automatically because we certainly don't want to make the incorrect decision. You can imagine if you had, say, a 30, 60, and 90 in there, Jobman is going to think conditionally that it always wants to give you the best price. So it's going to go looking for the 90. You might not want to order 90. So that's why we still leave it in the hands of the owner of the ERP to make those really important decisions. But yes, you can handle it. So you can put in different pack sizes, link them to the original order SKU, and that way you can use those substitutes. Really good power. And then I should have mentioned this, but that's one of the benefits of the preferred. By choosing a substitute as preferred, it will then become top of the list. So if commonly you would order that sling and it would almost always be a pack of 30 or 30 sheets or 30 channels at a time, because 60 gives you a better price, but 30 is the amount you really want to sit on, then absolutely that would be what I'd do. I'd set that 30 as the preferred substitute. And then every time you add in that material, you can quickly just grab that 30 or make the decision to do that 30, which is good. Stock reports, when an item is picked for a job, says it is a 0 quantity once picked. How many have we used to work minimum quantities of monthly usage? Absolutely. That's a good question. So the stock report is a live report. This is not an inventory report. The stock report is designed that if I walk into my system today, I need to know exactly how much I'm sitting on. So units once picked technically have gone. They're no longer in your inventory, no longer in your warehouse. So I don't want to include that in valuation because heaven forbid, and this is actually the reason we do it like this, if your warehouse was to burn down and you had to provide an insurance report, that's the amount you need to provide the insurer, what we were sitting on. And Jobman is fantastic at being able to handle it. It's really good. Quantity used is slightly different. That's more of like a job filter report with some inventory items. Those sorts of reports are things we're looking at the moment. Reporting is one area we'd like to definitely add more into the software. We're certainly open and looking for recommendations around things and use cases people are using. So that's definitely something we would like. We will probably add that into either the job or lead reports. once we've done a breakdown. So we have a third breakdown coming in, which will be able to break out categories into individual items. Once we have those individual items, that's a filter we can add to reporting. That's not too far away. That's going to be very exciting. But yeah, so that just so you know the difference. The stock report right now is a live report. It's designed around stock inventory control management and pricing. And then we will be bringing in further reports in the future around two very commonly asked areas, which are direct time reports and direct stock reports. But we'll definitely be able to handle it. Not sure if we'll be able to handle inventory over time management. That's a bit of a tricky one. That requires a lot of data, I guess, source caching, but certainly something we can definitely look at in the future. But yeah, 100% you'll be able to do that. Not a problem at all. How do you recommend keeping track of offcuts of sheets? Awesome question, Peter. We definitely, this is one of the best benefits of the system. So one of the things you can do with that inventory is I can link it to that original catalog item, but I can change the dimensions. So let's say you had an offcut of a very expensive sheet and the typical board is 2400 by 1200 by 16. I can go into the system and I can click on that catalog item and I can put in a unit of one. Yes, unit of one, not an item one. So unit of one, and I can change those dimensions to say 2400 by 600. So roughly half a board, and put that in. Now, the beauty of the system is when you go to do a job and you are picking up those materials, one of the things Jobman can do is it'll give you a list of your inventory items and you can see that the offcuts are there. Now, for most businesses, they're not too worried about basic sheet amounts and rates breaking down. That's a lot of information to keep track, but certainly anything that's expensive, such as stone or very high-end grains or veneers, absolutely you can do that. And then you can assign bay locations just to those offcuts, so you can see it as a bay location. You can see bay locations, I'm pretty sure, on those breakdowns as well, which is good. So when you put forward that and you go to break apart your inventory, you can just direct the team and say, yeah, make sure you grab that sheet and I'll order the other 9 for this job. So definitely offcuts, very useful. And because that's managed by the office manager roles in Jobman, one of the good things you can do is you can use the job alerts in your team to let them know when you have those offcuts to keep that up to date, which is cool. Can you have stock appliances in the inventory, then allocate those to a job, automatically show within the job so factor workers know? Awesome question, Caleb. Something I didn't mention in this webinar because I like to keep it focused on the what we have is coming very soon. We have another additional module coming into Jobman in our catalog, and this is going to be a big one. It's going to be called appliances. So appliances is the ability to take our catalog items on, there's a few extra parts of functionality that appliances require compared to a normal category item. It won't be put in the system as standard. I believe it'll be an extra optional module for people to opt into because it's not relevant to every industry that we deal with, but it certainly is a big one for a lot of clients. And there will be a lot of functionality around that will improve the way that particular category is handled for Jobman. We understand that there's a lot of information that appliances sort of, especially people who project manage appliances, where they be buy in and sell or just handle as part of their things. It doesn't matter whether you build gates or kitchens or whatever. I know appliances are a big one. So we'll actually be handling that in a separate module because there's a lot of information that we need in there for you. Things like the ability to track websites, links ups. Quite often people are looking for photos in those items because they get added into quotes. And the way they're handled as sort of stock management is a bit different. You need records of whether they're in inventory, whether you're selling them, whether the client is supplying them, etc. So absolutely, we will be handling all that in a brand new module. I don't have a time frame on that yet. I'm hoping it'll get started pretty soon, so I'm pretty excited about that one. But yeah, that's why I left that out today. Now, the short term for clients that don't really project manage appliances so much, they just sort of utilize them as part of their process, is you can create a category in Jobman under your materials and call it appliances. They can have their own pricing options. You can enter them, you can put them in, they can be added to your inventory, removed from inventory, added to quotes, brought into stock. So we can handle that at a basic level now, which is really good. And for a lot of companies, that's enough. They utilize the appliance run and that sort of gets them across the line. But we are fully aware that there's a lot more we can do in that area. And yeah, that will be coming out hopefully in the not too distant future, which will be good. But yeah, great module, good question. Great module. Looking forward to that coming out. So I think we've pretty much tapped our time there, which is awesome. Thank you all for the great questions. I'm going to wrap it up there. I want to thank everybody for their time, and I hope you certainly got a lot out of this webinar. This is a big one, and I know there's a lot going on. And I think you'll find that the purchase ordering webinar will take care of a lot more of those questions, and we'll be able to show you that flow more fully. But the first step is definitely getting it set up, getting the foundations in your software so that you can move forward. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have an amazing day, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.